Very warm welcome to this panel. My name is Neil Morisetti. Those who've seen the programme, there's a clue in the fact of my title that I used to be a sailor and then a diplomat, including the government's climate and energy security envoy and the Foreign Secretary Special Representative for Climate Change. I'm now at University College London, where I'm a Professor of Climate and Resource Security. Importantly, I live in Dorset, in North Dorset. The focus today is about energy. The panel is entitled Power Up, Power Down. And what we're going to try and talk about today is what we can do about energy, about how we're going to increase the power generated from renewable and other low-carbon sources, and how we're going to reduce the amount of fossil fuel we use, and at the same time improving our energy efficiency. Both of which, as we've heard already, more needs to be done in Dorset. 5% of our power from renewables is pretty depressing. And those who are here for the zero carbon brief will know that power down scores 2. It's out of 5, and 2 doesn't mean you're nearly there. And power up only scores 1. So there's a lot more to do. Yep, we can talk to politicians. Yes, we can talk about the media. Yes, we can talk about the multinationals. But ultimately, the onus is on all of us as the inhabitants of Dorset to get on and do things. And our panel today will look at what's possible and how, both from a domestic and commercial perspective. There is a slight change from the advertised panel in that technology is, I'm afraid, beaten us, and Jason Hawkes from Magna Housing won't be able to join us, but I am joined with Poppy Maltby, a colleague who is head of cities and regions at Regen, which is a not-for-profit centre on energy expertise and the market insight. She's an economist by training and have experience, but she's been with Regen since 2017 when she came from EDF, and she looks after the local authorities and communities as they make action to address the climate emergency. When she's not doing that, she's organising marathons and participating in them and raising money for local charities. Our other panellist is Rupert Hardy, who is the chair of North Dorset Council for Protection of Rural England, and he leads on renewable energy. In particular, the utilisation of something which every building, or virtually every building, has, a roof, in order that we can, perhaps that's the best place to place solar panels. And he comes to this role from a career in finance and recruiting, but he also is quite good at photography, cooking, and sculpturing, and I've actually seen he's not bad at Scottish country dancing as well. The plan is that I'm going to speak a few minutes about energy strategies and why we need an energy strategy. But then Poppy, followed by Rupert, will talk from their piece. We will have a very quick discussion, because I want to open this up to all of you for a Q&A, and the aim is that we will do all of that by 10 to 1, so we've caught up with what's going on in the programme. Energy is the key to everything we do. Without it, please come through and take a seat. Without it, we can't have the necessary economic growth and wherewithal to address the global challenges we're worried about, be it health, poverty, alleviation, housing, and what we're here to talk about today, the impact of a changing climate and what's going on in our environment. Traditionally, we have sought secure and affordable supplies of energy. Today, we need to add another word to that list. It's secure, it's affordable, and it's sustainable if we're going to drive down our greenhouse gas and CO2 emissions. It is a strategic issue, and therefore we need an energy strategy. And that applies at all levels, not just at national government. We've heard earlier comments about the local area energy plan. I think it's a BCP. It needs to be at local government, but it needs to be in companies, in businesses, and we as individuals need some form of strategy in thinking in our own minds as well. It's also critical that we address demand and not just supply. All too often, and we've seen it with this government strategy, the focus is on supply of energy. We need to look at the demand side as well, and in particular in electricity, we need to look at what we're doing at peak times. That strategy has 5 strands in my mind. Energy efficiency. It doesn't matter what source of energy you're using. If you use less, you're more efficient, you reduce your costs, and your energy security increases. And ideally, that should be locally generated energy as well. Now, there are expensive technology solutions out there, but a lot of it is relatively simple, relatively cheap, and most importantly, behavioural changes result in reductions in the amount of energy we use. The nature or type of energy we're using is key. We have to move, as we know, away from fossil fuels, especially oil and coal. And that direction is towards renewables and other low-carbon sources. But that transition is not going to happen overnight, so we need to map it out, how we're going to do it, how we're going to reduce the fossil fuels, how we're going to build up the renewable ones. And that requires us to do research and development, it requires us to have a technical program, we need to invest in alternative power generation systems, alternative transportation systems, and we need the infrastructure to support all of that. We need generation options, we need storage options, whether it be domestic battery options or it's large battery parks storing or hydro storage, whatever it is to store energy. We all know the grid is knackered. It was designed to generate power in single sources and transmit it out on that basis. We need to move to a more local approach which enables a more multi-directional flow of energy, and maybe we need to think about locally priced energy as well. Picking up on the point about communities should be benefiting perhaps from onshore wind. We need smart grids, in other words. And we need to look at things like carbon capture and storage. As Bob said, we aren't going to get to net zero without carbon capture and storage. It's going to be challenging. It is technically challenging, but we need to invest in it. But we also need to not say, this is going to do all our problems and solve everything. Whilst we're still dependent on oil and gas and imported energy, we need to see stability in the regions where we source our energy from. We saw what happened in February 22 with Putin's invasion of Ukraine and what happened to energy prices as a result of that. Energy is a global commodity. The event may be happening in Ukraine, but the price of oil from the Middle East goes up as much as other gas from elsewhere. But we also need to think to the future. Alternative technologies, low-carbon sources of power generation require other minerals and other things, so we need to see stability in those regions as well. And the final piece is we need to see security of supply. We need to have secure supply lines. And the most secure supply lines are those which are short and closest to home. That energy strategy needs to be coherent with our land strategy. What are we going to do to feed the nation? What are we going to do to house the nation? It needs to be coherent with our health strategy. It needs to be coherent with our industrial strategy. And finally, as well as being resourced, it's critical that we have the story or the narrative to support it. And a narrative which is relevant to a wider audience, it resonates with the audience. I would suggest a purist approach will not work. We need to be pragmatic, but we need to be honest and factual. And most importantly, I think we need to highlight the opportunities and the benefits, and not just the benefits in the price of the electricity you're paying or how you're using your vehicle, what's happening to the air quality, what's happening to reduction in health expenditure on respiratory issues and these sort of things. We need to look at the totality of it. Because then, with secure, sustainable and affordable energy, we can make the progression we want to reducing our greenhouse gas and reducing the risk posed by a changing climate, while still maintaining the prosperity in order to address all those other issues that we face in the world today. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Poppy for the keynote.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. I'm going to try and do this really fast because I think it'd be great to have a bit more audience participation and hear some questions and respond to some questions from you. So I'm here to talk a little bit about a study that Regen did a couple of years ago now called Decarbonising Dorset, and it looked at how Dorset could move from where they are now to 2050 and become net zero. And the title, I guess the title of my talk is a sort of the summary of what we concluded, which is that it's actually a potential leader, but it has a really, really long way to go. It has loads of opportunities that it hasn't grasped yet. Just quickly who we are Regen. I'm the head of cities and regions at Regen, and we are not for profit, and we are mission led. So the only things that we do is to decarbonise, democratise and decentralise energy, and we see this as a way of building a net zero energy system. So anything we do, and we work a lot with the government, local government, energy networks and energy companies, and it's all towards that mission that we want to achieve. And I think that democratising and decentralising is really, really critical, and it's about communities benefiting from this energy transition, and which is why these sorts of events are so critical to today and all the organisations involved in it. So just quickly on the title of the session, the sort of power up, power down, this is some analysis that we did in that study, and you can see here is the sort of I'm told I can't look at the slide and speak in the microphone at the same time. You can see here the transition from that rather poor 5% figure down to a scenario where Dorset is actually an energy exporter. So you can see right here you've got the big three, you've got transport, you've got gas, and you've got electricity. And this is actually your energy use. So I'm not talking about carbon emissions here, I'm talking about how much energy we are using in Dorset. And then next to it is how much energy you're generating. And that needs to shift and contract as you move across. So you've got your heat pumps, you've got your EVs, electrifying your transport, and that squeezes down from about 14,000, I think it's gigawatt hours, to around 7 to 8 gigawatt hours in 2050. So you're contracting down, but some of that is achieved anyway through the efficiencies of electrification. So your heat pump is significantly more efficient in the energy that it brings in and uses than your gas boiler, which is like an 80% efficient. A heat pump is could be 300% efficient. So you're achieving quite a lot of those reductions over time. You then need to build a lot more renewable energy. And at the end, you've got I guess for context, I was thinking, as I do sometimes, about the Navitas wind farm that never was, the 1 gigawatt offshore wind farm that we don't see off the coast of Dorset now. That would be about 3,500 gigawatt hours. So you're coming up to around half of the energy demand in Dorset from just that one generator that never happened. Not that I'm too bitter. Oh, no, I am quite bitter about that, but you never know. We might get that back one day. So that's sort of what we need to do. That is the sort of the transition, and it is entirely possible. We've got all the technologies there, and we know how to do it. The practicalities and politics of doing it is an entirely different thing, and that's often where things come apart. I thought I'd just highlight quickly, I think all of these stats have been talked about in earlier sessions, so I'm not going to do that again. Dorset is pretty typical in terms of its demand. You've got the big three, you've got big chunks from commercial, from domestic, and from transport. But the thing I did want to highlight, because another bee in my bonnet, is if you actually included the oil and gas production from Dorset, you might be doubling pretty much our carbon emissions in this area, and they don't count the oil and gas production from places like Witch Farm, for example. So those are really very significant producers in the area. So that leads me on a little bit to the point that we were making at the beginning about the potential leader, that Dorset is actually a really interesting microcosm of energy opportunity. It's a challenge and it's an opportunity. Dorset has a really high solar irradiance. It's sunny here, sunnier than other parts of the country. It means you get more electricity from your solar panels. It's also quite windy, although sadly not today. It's windy onshore and it's windy offshore. And those are technologies we can put in the ground now. But it's also got all these really exciting future technology possibilities. You've got marine tidal resource, which doesn't happen very many places in the country, certainly not in England. You've got an old nuclear site, which could feature a small modular reactor. A heavy emphasis on the could there, but it is a potential. You've got the oil and gas infrastructure that I've just mentioned, and that old infrastructure you can transform and use for a new green infrastructure. You can store hydrogen, you can move hydrogen, you can store energy using some of that infrastructure. You've got geology around Portland, quite a significant gas storage geology that might even work for hydrogen, these salt caverns, which is very exciting. And as BCP were mentioning, you may even have some geothermal. So Dorset actually has a huge number of energy opportunities. It's also got some really big industries. I think we've heard some of them today. You've got your tourism, you've got your agriculture, you've got a really large marine sector, you've got Poole Port, you've got Portland Port, you've got a big defence sector as well, and you've got things like quarries and extraction. So you've got a lot of industries that really need to find a way to decarbonise, and some of them are really putting a lot of thought and money into that. So there is a lot of demand for clean energy here as well. So my final slide, very quickly, is a diagram that you probably can't read, but this is just a sort of a summary of the sort of transition and some of the big decisions that need to be made in the area to get to net zero. Highlighted in pink are some of the ones that we think are particularly interesting for Dorset. I would highlight the 2037, which is actually quite late, the date that the licence runs out for the oil and gas extraction. So there's three sectors that are just, I guess, slam dunks for opportunity. There's the solar opportunity. We recommended that you go full guns for that. You could get another gigawatt of solar in Dorset quite easily using not that much land. Rupert might have things to say about that. But you get billions. I mean, I think my estimate's from 2021, but it's at least 500 million inward investment. You then get about $1 billion or over $1 billion of gross value added, and that's over 1,000 jobs just in that solar sector. And that's not a great sector for jobs because, you know, once it's there, it sort of sits there, but there's still opportunities there. Taking that to the next level, you've got the offshore wind farm. Those can take, you know, you might be looking at about £2 billion to build that thing. That'll be £3 to £4 billion of gross value add for the areas that's going to build it. And you're looking at 2,500 jobs in marine construction, port infrastructure, you name it. There's an awful lot of investment that could happen around an offshore wind farm in this area. And then the next one, which is the really big one and the really hard nut to crack, is the retrofit. So you need around £10 billion. It is 10 billion to invest in the 66% of homes that need retrofitting and the 85% that need a new heating system. And that's 10,000 jobs just there that are needed to do that sort of work in the area. So, you know, this green transition and opportunity, there's some really great opportunities for the technology, and they are just here. They're just here now, and we can really grasp those in Dorset if there's a willingness to do so. So I think those are just my main points. Just the thing about political leaders and why today is really important is often they are followers. They want to know that you want it and that it's technically possible. So organisations that you've got in this room are really, really important to demonstrate to those political followers what you want to see in Dorset. And so I just, echo all the other messages. It's really, really important, this sort of gathering today, and then using that to tell those politicians what you want to see. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. Dorset CPRE's primary remit is to protect and enhance the countryside and support rural communities, but we also fully endorse net zero. We've been actively promoting solar rooftop for some farms may cause harm to protected landscapes such as areas of outstanding natural beauty, heritage assets such as historic churches, and are being built on the best agricultural land, which is inappropriate at a time of rocketing food prices. However, we're well aware we still need more solar farms to combat net zero and we support particularly small community-funded ones, such as the Dottery solar array near Bridport. The government's recent policy paper, Powering Up Britain, was meant to address our slowness in introducing measures to meet net zero, but has been criticised for lacking ambition and offering little money. The government is still prioritising offshore wind to supply the majority of our renewable energy needs, but is now also aiming for 70 gigawatts of solar ground and rooftop capacity, a five-fold increase by 2035. But it's very unclear how this will be funded or implemented. Next year, a solar roadmap will be published, but we remain concerned that too much focus will be on greenfield solar and not enough on rooftop, where the government has belatedly focused. What can Dorset do, as new offshore winds less likely to be proposed here, and the main contribution will come from solar? Yet we also ask why 95% of households and 98% of businesses in Dorset had no roof-mounted solar as of December 21, even though installation has undoubtedly accelerated recently. The answer was first a failure by government, and I'm afraid to some degree by Dorset Council, to make it mandatory for new developments to fit solar panels on every roof. After much badgering, it appears Dorset Council is finally looking at ways it can impose new planning conditions on developers. Other local authorities have already done this. Government policy still focuses primarily on advisory guidelines rather than mandatory conditions. However, we could install solar panels on all new buildings, existing industrial and commercial rooftops and car parks, as this could provide up to two-thirds of the 70 gigawatt national target for solar energy, according to University College London, their Energy Institute. Rooftop solar is universally popular, and it would enable our towns and cities to play their part and would reduce strain on the grid. By 2050, rooftop solar should be able to meet a large part of our solar energy targets if the government can provide some financial support for retrofitting rooftop solar on domestic buildings. If we met solar energy targets solely through ground-mounted solar, 500,000 acres of our countryside, an area larger than Greater London, would have to be sacrificed. Much would be beautiful countryside. Therefore, a lot hinges on the promised government solar roadmap and the ability to resolve current major grid capacity issues. The grid is badly regulated, lacks capacity, and needs major reform. One of the reasons for slow progress on industrial buildings has been issues of building ownership and leasehold arrangements, complex planning processes, as well as roof weight and warranties. High energy prices now mean owners of commercial buildings are looking at rooftop solar wherever they can, especially as installing panels on these properties is so much cheaper than for domestic, thanks to scale. Warehouses alone could double the UK's current solar PV capacity of 15 gigawatts. The government is at least now consulting on changes to permitted development rights with the aim of simplifying planning processes for large commercial rooftop installations. Retrofitting older buildings will be expensive, however, although that on domestic solar PV was dropped a year ago, it has not yet been dropped on commercial. Another way would be to increase funding of community energy groups like Sustainable Swanage and Purbeck Energy, who promote the virtues of solar rooftop, as well as facilitating the fitting of panels at discounted prices. This would cost much less than subsidising directly millions of homeowners, but so far the government has only promised a miserly £10 million fund. More Dorset towns instead should follow Swanage's example. However, praise should be given to Dorset Council for improving the energy efficiency of its buildings and other climate initiatives that it has undertaken in the last year or two. In conclusion, we ask government to make these key changes. 1, major reform of the grid. 2, a national land use strategy to balance the competing demands for development, energy and infrastructure, food security and nature recovery, including a national solar rooftop target. 3, make solar panels mandatory for all new buildings and car parks too. Finally, give more financial support to community energy. Provide low-cost loans for both domestic and commercial rooftop solar, and please insulate. We ask that Dorset Council commits to introducing mandatory planning conditions for solar and enhanced energy-saving measures on all new homes. And we ask that you, Dorset residents, that you save as much energy as you can, insulate your homes so much better, and please install rooftop solar. Thank you very much indeed.
Poppy, Rupert, thank you very much. I think you've outlined some of the opportunities that sit there, both domestically and commercially. I think you've also outlined some of the tensions that sit there as well. And maybe, and I'm not always normally aligned with Chris Packham, but I think, as he alluded to, we need perhaps to compromise and work together to move forward on that. I apologise for using my phone to it. I've been trying to get Jason in on Q&A. I'm not sure if we've managed the technology for that. No, I'm getting a shaking head. In which case, we'll go straight to Q&A, and the three of us will field your questions. Do we have a roving mic available? If not... Right. Hands, 1, 2, 3, please.
Two questions, actually. The grid. The gas grid is, there's a figure up on there that says in the net zero hydrogen scenario, 40% of on-gas homes are heated by hydrogen. So,
yes, one of the scenarios that we did, it was a hydrogen scenario.
but I see nothing cohesive about hydrogen except in the Western Isles. The other thing is about, is government working with National Grid to redesign the grid? Because we hear it's crap, but we don't hear what is actually, where the connections are being made. There seems to be no leadership.
Yeah, I think we're going to take 3.
Thank you. Can you pass the mic to your left, to the end of the road, please?
Hi, I wanted to ask about listed buildings. I understood for rooftop solar now in a few London boroughs at least, they've waived the prohibition from using solar on listed buildings, and is that under consideration in Dorset, given that there's so many, frankly? And I just wondered how those tensions were being dealt with.
And then, thank you, and then down to the other end in the front row, please.
Hello, Carl. As far as the rooftops are concerned, 4 members of DCAM, between them, managed to get a rollout of about 140 rooftop solar panels at discounted prices, and that was an extremely easy thing to do, and we suggest that actually other people do it. If you want to ask me or Jenny, then that would be a good start. But more important, as you say, is the basic stuff of retrofitting and insulating your houses. You may be aware, this is a puff on my part, that there's Dorset Greener Homes will be opening in 2 weeks' time. We've actually got two of the hosts up on the table up here, opening up. Thank you, Poppy and Neil. We're hoping that people will take part in that and go and see how you could retrofit your house. But we also want new houses, and we want a little bit of money from councils, a bit more interest in that. I'm sorry I'm using that as a puff rather than a question, but perhaps we'll get the answers to those. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam, could you bring the microphone up, please? Poppy, would you like to take the first one to that, and then
Yes.
Rupert after?
Hydrogen, I could talk for hours about this. It's my opinion, and of quite a lot of people, is that it's not going to be a fuel for domestic properties. At the time we did the study, the government did have a sort of scenario that did that, and a scenario that was electrification. We were never really convinced that hydrogen was going to do it, and that is really the way that the world is going, that the hydrogen for domestic heating is very, very unlikely. So sort of slightly ignore that. Hydrogen as a fuel for other things and hard to decarbonise sectors and things like that, that's much, much more likely. So things like for Dorset, for the defence sector, for the ports, for other, big industry. That looks like an interesting thing to explore. So on the grid, there is a lot going on. We do a lot with all the grid companies. It hasn't been great so far, but there is a lot of programs now to try and bring forward investment in the grid. And part of the problem has just been how it's been regulated and how investment has been allowed in the future. And they're opening that up now. They're now going, okay, you can invest for the future. They used to just say, oh, well, if you've got one thing to connect, we will upgrade a part of the network for that one thing, which makes no sense. It's completely unstrategic. So they have recognised this and they are moving forward. And actually, at a domestic scale, there was a change this year that meant heat pumps, EV chargers, anything small that you're doing, you will then have a lot less cost to connect to the network. So there's been some rule changes already that will make that difference. But yeah, watch this space, but I'm hopeful.
Sorry, I didn't hear the second
Could
question.
you take the questions on rooftop solar panels and particularly the piece about listed buildings, and what you can, if I got the question right, it's what you can and what you can't do.
I think pretty much can't right now, but there are some very
We explored this the other day because the consultation that Dorset Council asked us to fill in. And I talked to Historic England, and they're becoming much more flexible these days. What they say is, for example, there are churches, with grade 1, who've got now panels on their roofs without a problem, as long as they're sort of discreet, well hidden. They're in terms of secondary glazing, there are all sorts of proposals now. Historic England wants to make suggestions how you might do it. One issue in the past has been, and this came from Historic England, is that conservation officers, perhaps within the local council, have been behind the curve here. But I gather things have been changing in the last few months.
Thank you. If Jason was here, he'd be talking about retrofitting. Magna Housing has done a fantastic job, not just in new houses, new social housing, but retrofitting in old social housing. And the work they've done. One of the challenges they face, of course, with social housing tends to be a higher turnover of people living in them, is that it's all done and all understood and everything works for the first family there. They then move on somewhere else, a new family comes in and isn't necessarily au fait with what's going on. So we need to do much more about the education of the benefits, the opportunities, but also how to use the equipment properly, and in order to ensure that you are driving down your energy bills and you're reaping those benefits. On the listed building part, and I'm going to risk matrimonial piece here because the expert on retrofitting is my wife in a listed building, we are making progress. And I think councils have hidden behind, oh, it's listed, you can't do anything. Well, if the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea is willing to play, then the chances are most people can, and there's now coming, as Rupert said, pressure put on councils to look to alternative options. And technology helps again, back to the research and development. Instead of great big slab-sided panels, we're seeing much more sophisticated ways of doing it. So I think that those who are in listed buildings need to keep the pressure on councils and saying, come on, it's happening over here, why isn't it happening here? In the sense that is a message in all the things we're talking about today, putting the pressure on the councils to move forward and not come up with no, because no is far too simple an answer. Next round of questions, please. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got a microphone, great. That gives there. And where did I say 2 was? Please go ahead.
I know in Germany they are now reaching the end of life of many solar panels. I'm not quite sure how they address it, but I would like to know who looks into this in Britain so that they don't just get dumped into another country or pollute here or etc.
Thank you. No.
2 questions really, or 2 parts, but one is another sort of idea solution is this big waste incinerator that, like Singapore, has 0 output and produces energy from waste. So Singapore obviously invested huge amounts into theirs and theirs works, as I understand it. I don't know any more about that. You probably do. And the second thing is, why do we focus on net zero and not look at carbon sequestering more for agriculture and for things like that? Why is this drive to net zero? Because I have an opinion, I think we need to be carbon neutral.
Third one? Yeah, Jenny, I think it's the lady who's just got her hand up, her right hand up. And then number 4 is from the gentleman's horizontal structure.
Yes, I'd like to ask if there's any progress on sorting out the grid, which is a big issue as regards the huge increase in generation. We saw on the previous page there with the illustration that the electricity generation is going to be so huge, the grid just won't be able to cope. So I'm just wondering if there's any progress on creating local grids or enhancing local storage. So everybody having PV panels, okay, you're saying, yes, get rooftop solar and everything, but surely they need to have their own storage so that there isn't actually a flood of electricity that can't be accepted into the grid. So there's a big sort of bottleneck going on there in my view, and surely it would be wise to have all new estates built with houses with a storage facility or with individual batteries in each house to go with the PV panels.
Thank you. If you just pass it straight all the way forward, it would be perfect. Thank you.
With PV, does it have still to be panels? We were promised a few years ago that it could be tiles, it could be things that would look like roofs, and that would surely solve your problem with the listed building.
Thank you for those questions. I think they're going to be our last questions. Can I ask Poppy, if you'd like to start, perhaps look at waste, grid?
Yeah. So, energy from waste. So I think the Portland incinerator got a bit of a no. I don't know if they're going to come back. So the problem, so there's not an easy answer. My view is that what you're doing, a lot of this residual waste is plastic. So you're basically burning plastic, which is basically oil, which is basically terrible emissions to air. It may be carbon, it could be all sorts of other pollutants. So actually just burning plastic is a pretty terrible thing. We don't at the moment have a better idea for what to do with it. But previously what we did was store it. It's called landfill. And it could be that what you're actually doing is burning a lot of resource which might be precious in the future once we've worked out a way of extracting it and turning that back better into new plastic and other things. So in terms of keeping all options open, I would say you should do more landfill and less incineration because there's a lot of work going on to try and extract and recycle plastic and get that better in the future. It's really difficult though because you end up with this sort of, then we can just keep on generating lots of waste. So once you've got an incinerator, you've got an incentive to keep fueling it. I mean, they've invested because they want to generate electricity from it. And that's a 20-year investment, when actually we just need to be reducing the waste that we're producing, particularly the residuals. So it's a really complex area, but it's certainly on sort of optionality. My preference would be, let's go back to landfill and do better on reducing. On the network issues, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot going on in networks. It's about being a responsive demand. So we saw last winter participating in these programs where people were turning down demand when there was a bit of when there wasn't enough generation on the network, and that's gone quite well. So the answer is there's a lot of different things that need to go on. Yes, there's new network that needs to be built, but also you need to spread out when you're using the network. You need to store, absolutely, energy storage and battery storage is really critical, and longer term storage is an area where people are doing a lot of innovation. And it's just worth remembering that the network, it's not really used for quite a lot of the time, even though it's reaching a peak and reaching a critical point at about 5 in the evening on a cold, windless day. a lot of that is still not used, and there is spare capacity. It's just when there's spare capacity. So yeah, there's a lot of work going on to try and reach get the solution for the networks. And there's, like I said, I'm quite optimistic that we can get there.
Do you want to talk about panels and pins and tiles? Well, I'll do pins and tiles if you like.
On panels, I think as soon as the government makes it mandatory for all new estates to have solar panels, the citizens of this world will suddenly move rather fast and looking at how they can A, reduce the cost, and B, improve the look of panels that will go onto housing. But until it's mandatory, it's going to take a bit of time, because it's purely an optional extra as it is at the moment. But undoubtedly, you look in the States, I mean, I think Elon Musk had had panels that he unveiled some years ago that looked pretty good. They were expensive, true. But undoubtedly, so the first step is making it mandatory for all new housing estates to have solar panels on them. Did I hear ask a question on carbon sequestration? I mean, you are all probably aware that there are other talks going on today about sort of the hedgerows and tree planting and things. And we at CPRE have been very busy sponsoring tree planting, and we've been also, along with DCAM, extremely active on hedgerow rejuvenation. We've been doing work on this front for 40 years, and you can see what we've been achieving this year. Anyway, there's a video up which will tell you more.
Not much good in drought. Not much good in drought.
So the final point was, I was going to make that point on net zero. And one of the things I didn't say, which I'd like to start with, is about the bath. So what we've got is an overflowing bath with the taps running really hard. So that's carbon dioxide pouring into our already full bath, and our bath is overflowing. Sequestration, planting hedges, these are fantastic ways of mopping up that floor and bailing out that bath. But the most important thing to do is to turn off the taps. So that's the point of net zero, is we need to reduce what's in the bath. And the only way you can't just do that by planting hedges, it has to be stopping fossil fuels. And the agricultural sector, as we've heard today, is quite a source. It's quite a source of that tap. So you need to turn that off and also get the benefits from everything that's happening on land use and agriculture to sequester and mop up that excess carbon that we've already got. So net zero I think is probably the right term. There are lots of ways of talking about it, but we need to do both of those things.
Thank you. Very briefly, recycling panels, we can't export the waste. We actually need to take those panels apart. We need to extract the minerals and materials that can be reused, and we need to reuse them in the next generation panels or in EVs or whatever. So,
Is it ready?
No, it's not ready because we've got the classic, we're short-termist and we need to think strategically, which brings me back to that energy strategy I was talking about. Final point before I ask you to thank the panel. The tiles are there, the paint is there, and that should help with listed building. And interestingly, some of it came from research and development in that country that's going to chair the next COP, with a guy, the boss of Masdar, their renewable energy company, who's going to be the chair of a conference of parties. Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you to join me in thanking our panel for this session?